Starting a war without controlling the electromagnetic spectrum is tantamount to defeat. This quote from 2019 comes from none other than Anatoly Tsiganok, a former Russian colonel and director of the Center for Military Forecasting in Moscow itself. The reference to the electromagnetic spectrum here points to one aspect of Russia's broader electronic warfare struggles, specifically its failure to control low-altitude airspace in Ukraine, where radar-guided anti-air systems are most effective. But Russia's Air Force entered the Ukraine conflict in 2022 with what should have been overwhelming advantages: a fleet several times larger than Ukraine's and a vast arsenal of modern combat aircraft. And yet what followed stunned analysts. Despite its hardware edge, the Russian Air Force, constrained by a doctrine that treats aircraft as extensions of ground forces, failed to achieve air superiority, forcing a global reassessment of how modern air power is actually used in high-intensity conflict. Rather than creating overwhelming aerial superiority, which would allow Russia to dominate the skies over Ukraine and pressure the latter's land-based defenses, Russian aircraft devolved into long-range glide bomb carriers, with practically little to no operations that would take them even close to the Ukrainian airspace. How did Russia manage to fumble with one of the world's largest fleets of aircraft? What strategies that Russia employed, even before the invasion itself, led to the war becoming one of attrition, long-range artillery fire, and causing significant military equipment losses? And what lessons can the rest of the world take from Russia's failures? Stick around to find out on today's episode of The Military Show. Let's start by directly comparing the sizes and strength of Russia's and Ukraine's Air Force fleets to paint a picture of just how much of a theoretical advantage Russia had, and when starting what was supposed to be a quick invasion, but has evolved into a multi-year war. Before the February 2022 invasion, Russia possessed approximately 900 tactical combat aircraft. In contrast, Ukraine's air forces had around 125 combat-capable jets, a mix of aging MiG-29s, Su-27s, and Soviet-era bombers. On paper, the disparity was staggering. The Russian Air Force, or VKS, inventory included approximately 350 modern fighters, Su-30SMs, Su-35s, and Su-57s, 125 heavy bombers, Tu-22M3s, Tu-95s, and Tu-160s, and hundreds of attack aircraft like the Su-34. Ukraine's Air Force relied primarily on Soviet-era MiG-29s, Su-27s, and Su-24s, many of which needed maintenance and upgrades. This is why we said combat-capable when referring to Ukraine's fleet. While Ukraine technically likely has more aircraft than this, a lot of them were simply unusable due to lacking parts or even pilots to fly them. Even worse, since 1991, Ukraine, under both international demilitarization agreements and domestic economic pressures, downsized its enormous inherited air fleet. From an initial post-Soviet inventory of over 1,000 combat aircraft, hundreds were either sold, scrapped, or transferred abroad, and not a single new aerial platform was procured during that time. Throughout that time, the Russian Federation continued modernizing and expanding its own fleet. However, as it would turn out, many of those aircraft would see limited use in high-risk operations, with a large portion being held back or relegated to safer, standoff roles, something we'll explore in more detail later. In May 2022, British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace highlighted the disparity between the fleets when he noted that Russia had committed over 500 aircraft to the Ukraine campaign, a force roughly 4 times the size of Ukraine's entire air fleet. Despite this overwhelming numerical advantage, open-source intelligence from Oryx and other monitoring groups documented the destruction of more than 90 Russian aircraft in the first year of conflict alone, while Russia struggled to achieve its air objectives. This goes contrary to the state and capabilities of each fleet's flagship fighter jets. Russia's premier operational fighter, the Su-35S Flanker E, represents a significant theoretical advantage over Ukraine's mainstay, the MiG-29 Fulcrum. The Su-35S boasts a superior range, 2,000 miles compared to under 1,000, a more powerful Ibris-E radar with a detection range nearly twice that of the MiG-29's N019 radar, and advanced electronic warfare systems including the Khibny ECM suite, with 12 hardpoints for air-to-air missiles compared to the MiG-29's 6. The Su-35S should dominate beyond visual range engagements. The Su-34 fallback strike aircraft, meanwhile, offered Russia a theoretical precision strike capability that Ukraine simply couldn't match with its aging Su-24 fleet. With an advanced PESA radar, the Platan electro-optical targeting system, and the capability to employ precision-guided munitions like the Kh-38 missile, the Su-34 was designed specifically for the kind of precision strikes needed to neutralize air defenses. However, Russia's newest fighter, the Su-57 Felon, has made limited appearances in Ukraine. In May 2022, Russian state media claimed the Su-57 had conducted missile strikes while remaining outside Ukrainian air defense zones, a claim consistent with its limited deployment as a standoff platform rather than as an air superiority fighter as originally designed. Simply put, Russia had all the means to dominate in air-to-air warfare. So what happened? Well, neither side actually committed to fighting in the air directly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was divided into a few distinct fronts, with the Kyiv invasion in the north and the Donbas invasion in the east of the country. In these areas, Russia wasn't fighting Ukraine's aircraft, but its anti-air defenses. Ukraine's initial air defense network relied on Soviet-era S-300 and Buk M1 systems, supplemented by shoulder-fired man-pads like the Igla and Stinger. Following Western aid packages, Ukraine integrated modern systems including US Patriot batteries, credited with downing Russian aircraft, NASAMS medium-range systems, German Iris-T, French Crotale systems, and Italian SAMP-T. This layered defense created what the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI's Justin Bronk, called one of the most dense and effective integrated air systems on the planet. Ukrainian officials claimed to have downed over a dozen Su-34s and Su-35s in a single month during the summer of 2023, though these figures couldn't be independently verified. Several incidents highlight the Russian Air Force's struggles. The destruction of multiple Russian helicopters and transport aircraft at Kherson International Airport in March 2022, confirmed by satellite imagery following repeated Ukrainian artillery strikes. The loss of a rare A-50 AWACS aircraft in January 2024, reportedly shot down over the Sea of Azov by Ukrainian air defenses, representing a significant blow to Russia's airborne surveillance capabilities. The downing of 3 Su-34 fighter bombers in a single day on December 22, 2023, near the southern front, as claimed by Ukraine, marking one of the most significant single-day losses for the Russian air arm. A daring Ukrainian airstrike on Snake Island in May 2022, where Su-27 fighters bombed Russian positions, demonstrating Ukraine's ability to challenge Russian forces in contested airspace. Similarly, Ukraine's aircraft were used to counter the land-based offensive, pressuring incoming Russian troops and mechanized infantry. In response, Russia placed its long-range anti-air systems close to the Ukrainian border, most notably in Crimea and regions neighboring Donbas. This air defense network includes S-400 and S-300V4 long-range systems, Pantsir S-1 short-range systems, and the Tor M2 medium-range platform. In August 2023, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed these systems had shot down over 800 Ukrainian drones and 39 HIMARS missiles the previous month alone. While these figures are likely exaggerated, they reflect the reality that both sides face substantial risk when operating aircraft near the front lines. In short, the threat posed by extensive air defense networks has effectively created mutual no-fly zones. But Russia's inability to conduct effective suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD, operations stands out as perhaps its most significant failure. In the first 48 hours of the invasion, Russia launched only 100 anti-radiation missiles against Ukrainian air defenses, a fraction of what the US employed in the opening days of the 2003 Iraq campaign. By April 2022, Pentagon officials assessed that Russia had failed to destroy more than 80% of Ukrainian fixed air defense sites. This failure stemmed partly from equipment shortages. Russia deployed fewer than 50 specialized Su-24MR and Su-34 aircraft configured for the SEAD mission, many without the Kh-31P anti-radiation missiles needed to target radar systems effectively. A senior US defense official told Reuters in early March 2022 that Russia was already running low on precision-guided munitions just weeks into the war. That assessment appeared accurate as the invasion quickly shifted toward a grinding, land-based offensive focused on Kyiv and the Donbas. The Kyiv push, however, collapsed early. Ukrainian forces had fully repelled the assault and regained control of the capital region by early April 2022. But while Russian aircraft look impressive on paper, their actual combat capabilities have been limited so far. Apart from the fact that the aircraft were outmatched by NATO-donated anti-air defenses, Russia might have been reusing old tech to bolster the claims about its air fleet readiness. The supposedly modern aircraft seem to have been directly countered by Ukraine and NATO's GPS jamming capabilities. In May 2022, just a few months into the invasion, a downed Su-34 was found to contain a basic commercial Garmin GPS taped to the dashboard, an embarrassing revelation that pointed to deeper problems. Russian military aircraft are equipped with the integrated dual navigation systems using both GLONASS and GPS. The presence of a commercial GPS device suggested failures or reliability issues across the entire onboard system, forcing pilots to fall back on civilian tools instead of trusted military-grade technology. The GLONASS also seems to have been reported to be severely underfunded. This could have resulted in Russia not launching enough satellites to provide broad enough coverage for any positional accuracy. This claim is supported by Russia's need to build land-based differential correction stations across Syria to improve GLONASS accuracy there by 40%. Syria was once one of the biggest importers of Russian military tech, including anti-air systems and aircraft reliant on GPS and GLONASS. But a recent regime shift saw Damascus ban Russian imports, cutting off a major arms market. Training issues didn't help either. Most Russian pilots averaged just 100 to 120 flight hours per year, far below NATO's 180 to 240, and only a fraction of that time is spent on combat training, with the rest focused on basic flight skills. Additionally, Russian pilots aren't trained in modern combat tactics. Instead, the prevailing notion seems to be to use military aircraft as primarily supportive units for a long-range operation. Russian military doctrine, as evidenced by various VKS exercises before the actual invasion, seems to rely on ground controllers to direct and guide Russian pilots in executing longer-range missions. In the hectic war in Ukraine, this would mean that Russia's aircraft were chained to the country's land-based mechanized infantry, which would be one of the military's only solutions to providing a steady supply of targets to strike from the air. However, the significant pressure that those same mechanized forces encountered from Ukraine's military meant that some of those targets could have already moved away by the time the aircraft was deployed. The lack of military training for the pilots would then stifle their ability to choose new targets dynamically. At the same time, the rigid military structure in Russia would likely have precluded those pilots from being encouraged to operate outside of predetermined mission parameters, which would fail to account for the changing structure and flow of the war. The Russian Air Force also operates under a strictly hierarchical command structure with limited flexibility for on-scene commanders. According to RUSI's analysis from October 2022, Russian air planning cycles typically take 24 hours to develop, approve, and communicate to units, creating a sclerotic response to battlefield developments. This rigid planning process was starkly illustrated in March 2022, when Ukrainian forces ambushed a 40-mile Russian military convoy north of Kyiv. Despite clear weather and the critical nature of the convoy, Russian air support was minimal and uncoordinated. A senior Pentagon official described it as baffling, adding that the Russians had complete air superiority but failed to use it effectively. This combination is in sharp contrast to the Western military doctrine, which prioritizes dynamic tracking, target acquisition, and overall combat flexibility. For Ukraine, this provided them with unique benefits and insights into how both ends of the military doctrine scale think. Before 2014, the upper echelons of their military were composed of officers with extensive experience in Soviet military training and doctrines. But after 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine began rapidly modernizing its military from the ground up, starting with its doctrine. The country spent the next 8 years under NATO's guidance and training regimes. This meant that Ukraine, at the start of the invasion, had US-provided intelligence on Russia's military movements and positioning, supported by decades-long experience in Soviet military tactics and bolstered by NATO's adaptive approach to combat. Additionally, one of the hallmarks of NATO's military doctrine, encouraged by the US, has been aerial superiority in combat. As the country with the largest aerial fleet, the US leveraged this for over 2 decades in the War on Terror, and the rest of NATO provided military support through joint training exercises and operations. This allowed Ukraine to learn aerial supremacy tactics and, more importantly, how to counter Russia's. Remember, when the invasion happened, it was all but given that Russia would try to exert aerial supremacy over Ukraine due to its larger air force, putting Ukraine in a defensive position from day one. But why has Russia's military doctrine proved to be so ineffective? Well, military analysis of post-Soviet advancement of Russia's equipment and operations revealed that the country suffers from a significant defensive bias. In essence, even during the Cold War, Russian military tactics have been oriented toward protecting Mother Russia and key military assets inside the country from external attacks. This meant that the VKS was directly influenced, budgeted, and oriented towards a defensive war against NATO rather than an offensive one, like the invasion of Ukraine. This could explain why Russia's military tactics and strategies have shown little focus on trying to remove Ukraine's anti-air defenses or suppressing communication or radar equipment. The country never actually expected that it would need to do so in long-range missions, preferring to keep its assets firmly within Russia's own airspace. Instead, Russia would use its extensive arsenal of anti-air equipment such as the aforementioned S-300s and 400s, but also the more modern S-500s, to stifle the enemy's air force in their attempts to attain air supremacy over Russia itself. When faced with an opponent that couldn't apply sustained aerial pressure, at least in the early years of the war, many of Russia's more advanced air defense assets and military strategies weren't fully leveraged in the traditional sense. However, these systems didn't go unused. Russia adapted their use against Ukrainian drones, missiles, and bombs, and in some cases even repurposed air defense platforms like the S-300 for ground strikes, blurring the line between defensive and offensive use. This concept is further complicated by the country's lackluster procurement of modern equipment and technology. One Russian defense analysis points out that while established Russian hardware designs experienced successful growth, only marginal progress was made in producing completely new weapons and platforms, such as fifth-generation aircraft. Between 2010 and 2022, the VKS received approximately 350 modern fighter aircraft, most of which ended up being only upgraded designs of older platforms, including the Su-30SM multi-role fighters, Su-35S air superiority fighters, and Su-34 bombers. But these investments meant that the country's air forces and supportive systems likely underestimated the need for less flashy systems, such as radar, communications, or strike capabilities. For example, a 2021 article published in Military Thought, which is the English translation of the Journal of the Russian Federation's Ministry of Defense, admitted that Russia was still lagging in the development of a wide variety of platforms, including advanced fixed-wing and rotary, low-altitude and stratospheric, reconnaissance and reconnaissance strike, fighter and jammer, and relay and radar surveillance and guidance UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. All of these systems will be vital in conducting an offensive aerial campaign, especially against a country that primarily used previous generation air defenses, supported with minimal NATO donations and doctrine changes, at least at the time of the invasion. Facing these challenges, Russia has adapted by converting unguided Fab 500 bombs into rudimentary glide bombs with added wing kits and basic GPS guidance. These weapons, which were first reported in use near Kharkiv in January 2023, allow Russian aircraft to launch from outside the range of Ukraine's air defenses. This was one of the major shifts in the scale and tide of the war. Rather than conducting an offensive campaign via land, Russia would resort to using long-range ordnance to put enough pressure on Ukraine's defenses to retreat before land troops arrived. A May 2023 intelligence briefing by British officials estimated Russia was dropping up to 20 such weapons daily, demonstrating how the VKS had shifted to a standoff role rather than attempting to achieve true air superiority. By 2025, the use of drones and glide bombs skyrocketed, with a report from January suggesting that Russia launched over 750 glide bombs in a week, extrapolating to around 3,000 such strikes per month. This, coupled with the use of long-range drones, meant that Ukrainian anti-air defenses were not fighting smart aircraft, but dumb bombs guided by barely functioning GPS systems that contained lethal ordnance loads. While less accurate than purpose-built precision weapons, these modified bombs have allowed Russia to maintain pressure on Ukrainian positions while minimizing aircraft losses. The Ukraine conflict has forced militaries worldwide to reconsider their assumptions about air power. The massive investments many nations have made in fifth-generation fighters like the F-35 and Su-57 may provide less return on investment in environments saturated with advanced air defenses and electronic warfare capabilities. The F-35 program was meant to cement US dominance in the skies, a stealth fighter designed to outmatch anything Russia or China could put in the air. And in many ways it does. Pilots flying missions over Syria and the Pacific against some of the world's most advanced air defense systems have returned without a single F-35 lost in combat. But behind that combat prowess lies a troubled development path. Years of delays, safety concerns, buggy software, and costly retrofits have pushed the projected cost of the program past $2 trillion. What was once touted as a cost-effective fleet cornerstone has become the most expensive weapons platform in American history. A powerhouse, no doubt, but one built at a staggering price. The conflict has also highlighted the increasing importance of unmanned systems. Both sides have employed drones extensively, from Turkey's Bayraktar TB2 to Russia's Orlan-10, finding them more expendable and cost-effective for many missions traditionally performed by manned aircraft. Starting in 2023, Ukrainian forces demonstrated this shift by using modified commercial drones to strike Moscow directly, bypassing Russia's vaunted air defense network. Since then, both sides have only advanced their drone capabilities, drastically reducing the cost of long-range missions. In essence, the war in Ukraine rapidly turned into an economic one, with drones costing as little as $700, taking on equipment that could cost millions. At the same time, countries, especially those with significant air force assets like the US and its NATO allies, might need to rethink how they approach aerial warfare. A large part of why Russia failed to dominate the skies came from an unexpected source, SpaceX's Starlink. While it didn't provide satellite imagery, It gave Ukrainian forces real-time battlefield connectivity, enabling drones and artillery to strike Russian targets with deadly precision. This effectively means that a future war needs to account not only for military assets, but also civilian ones that could be reused for military purposes or provide vital intelligence. For Russia, rebuilding its air force will require not just replacing lost aircraft, but fundamentally rethinking its approach to air warfare. The estimated cost of replacing Russia's confirmed aircraft and helicopter losses now exceeds $7.2 billion, at a time when Western sanctions have choked access to critical aerospace parts and technologies. Simultaneously, the country's military doctrine still exemplifies defense over offense. Given that its air forces have been exhausted by its efforts in Ukraine, Russia now lacks both the offensive and defensive capabilities in a potential conflict against NATO. And let's not forget that Russia's aggressive posturing in recent years led NATO to rethink its military strategy and budgeting as well. Countries like Germany and Poland, which previously relied on shared military efforts led by US spending, have made bold plans to revolutionize their national defense budgets and revitalize their military-industrial complexes. The alliance itself has gained new members in Finland and Sweden since the invasion started, both of which have long histories of independent military technology development and research. Finland, the UK, and Germany have openly provided Ukraine with advanced weapon prototypes, giving them months of real-world data on how these systems perform against Russian platforms. The Russian Air Force's failures in Ukraine represent more than just tactical setbacks. They signal a fundamental shift in modern air warfare, where numerical superiority and platform capabilities no longer guarantee success against a determined adversary with modern air defenses and Western support. Within that framework, Russia has all but lost its standing as one of the world's largest military powers. It remains to be seen how that will affect the tenuous geopolitics between NATO and China. But what do you think? How will the US, China, and the rest of NATO change their military doctrine to account for the stark changes in modern warfare evidenced in Ukraine? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Now go and check out why Russia's navy sucks, or click this other video instead.